We're continuing on in a series of all kinds of prayer, and today we're in part 19, and we're actually looking at all-night prayer. And all kinds of prayer, we're actually looking at all-night prayer, and Jesus himself being the person doing this, and also in light of the prayer of the all-night prayer he does, we notice that there are various other aspects which I've added to it as things he did do at that point in time, which is he's using the prayer of foresight and also the prayer of preparation for an expansion of the kingdom. And we were deeply in it. And let me just give you the scriptures. I'm not going to read them out today, but it's Luke 6, 11 to 19, Acts of the Apostles chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, and verse 7, Acts 11, 1 to 3, and also John's Gospel chapter 4, verses 1 to 3, which it will do you good to go have a look at. But I'm going to continue on. We were basically we were actually dealing with Acts 11, where we had seen that there had been an expansion of the kingdom, and as I said, obviously the apostles had not been prepared for this, which had happened in Acts 6, and there had been an infiltration, and therefore we then noticed that in Acts 11, although the people in Judah, when they heard it, rejoiced and gave God thanks, but when those apostles came, when Peter came back to Jerusalem, the faction that had now come into place there, because remember in Acts 6 it's the Jerusalem situation that's there, and where they started to multiply like that, now had built up a faction. In fact, they were the circumcision faction within there, and they were now criticizing Peter for expansion. Amazing. But they're now critical of this expansion that had happened. But if you even just look at what we had been looking at with Jesus and the expansion of his kingdom, it looked to me that even he was going towards the regions of Tyre and Sidon, so he was expanding out and not looking to exclude. But to say, it's important for us to see these things. And I wanted to contrast this because when they had that expansion, they, unlike Jesus, who had gone out and taken that prayer time, all-night prayer time, and had come out with foresight and understanding, and of course understanding the expansion and the kind of things that would come up, because these things will come up when you're about to expand. And that's why I said to you, the beauty of Jesus is that not only did he pray for immediate things, but he also prayed in accordance with things that were going to come up, so that when that time came, he had already covered that. So you don't find Jesus hitting and missing. So that thing coming, the situation coming, and Jesus is taken by surprise by what happens, because he had already prayed that ahead of time in the preparation time. And as I said, as we even go through this, we're going to see various other aspects of this, how wise Jesus was in doing that. Now, and I mentioned that there, that's what was happening there with this, with the apostles as this expansion took place. But because they had not taken care of that, they now had a criticisms brought against them. So first of all, in the Acts 6, the Hellenists started to criticize. They quashed that one by saying, we're not going to do this, because really it's not right for us to do this. Find people who will do it. But if you notice, it's interesting if you notice something. At that point in time, even Peter them said, okay, we put a council together and you guys choose. Now, if you notice something, they didn't criticize Peter and say, well, you shouldn't do this. They just found the council, selected the people, and the apostles prayed for them. Period. Now, but it's after that that we now find these factions of people coming. So if you notice at that point in time, nobody criticized and said, well, why don't you guys go and feed them yourselves? No, 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 no. That, we don't see any criticism, we just see them line up, do what they said, found men of the Spirit, and believe me, if you notice the men that they chose, there, let me tell you something, all that Hellenist nonsense, shut up. It, but let me tell you something, when you send somebody like Stephen to take care of that, it will, let me tell you something, you will have the Spirit and not the flesh. And believe me, by the time Stephen had finished that, all of that thing died down, so we don't have the Hellenist problem again. But we have a worse problem. These ones here who become a thorn. But moving on. So basically that's what happened there, and that's where we had looked at and seen the distinction, because I was making a distinction, because when Jesus came down from that mountain having prayed all night, he then selected his 12 men who were going to carry on this expansion. And we've just even seen through the Acts 6 and Acts 11 that that expansion was taking place in those very places that he was talking about, where people came. So that expansion came to him on that level ground, met him, but he met them with the apostles. So they should have been conscious and have seen the apostles, Jesus, and then seen those people as those with him. As I said, the only difference between the two of them was that Jesus had power coming from them. None of them did. So he didn't say nobody was seeking to touch Peter. And I tell you why nobody was seeking, because Peter didn't have any temptation. There was no power oozing from no Peter to go and heal anybody. And Peter hadn't fasted, he hadn't prayed, so there was nothing there. So he didn't see, and some of them thought, well, let me touch Peter just in case he's with this man. So maybe he too has the same thing flowing there. No. They were not seeking to touch Peter. But let me tell you something, that same Peter they were not seeking to, when he came down in that Acts 5, there came a time when people were looking for his own shadow. And his shadow healed them because the power was there. But if you notice, he had mentioned that earlier. No, it comes to it later. He had said we must give ourselves to prayer and ministry of the word. Which, of course, when they gave them that would be there, because he would have done the job of being filled with the power that was made available. So they were praying and doing all of that. We only begin to see that change, as I said, when we have all of these debates and things that start coming up. And then one of the things you will notice is not there again is the power. But I'm not looking at that today. What I'm really looking at is Jesus' prayer. I just wanted to mention that because this was something that occurred in the expansion of the kingdom. Now, I said I'll go back again so that we look again at the prayer, which obviously we're seeing here that Jesus did, the all-night prayer, because Jesus continued all night in prayer, which obviously we see here in Luke's Gospel, chapter 6, 11 to 19. Now, it's something here I want to mention again that is important to see, because this is again foresight. Even as Jesus goes into prayer, he said it was, what we said, it was around that time, watch it, that Jesus went out to the hill country to pray. And he continued in prayer to God. Now, I want to jump in here now, because he said it was at that time he went into the hill country to pray. Now, and I'm bringing us back here now into John, because these are things you thread through in the Bible as you study the Word of God and see events and situations, some that some mention, some that others don't. But if you now come into John's Gospel chapter 4, we're going to see this play out here. And I said in John Gospel 4, 1 to 3, now watch, he said this. He said, when Jesus learned, so here again, we see something about Jesus. Just like it said when they had planned to come after him. So he said, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard, so he realized something they done, that he was making and immersing more disciples than John. You see, well, what importance is that? When Jesus heard, they had heard he was expanding. See, expansion. The key there. When Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard, they realized now that Jesus was making more disciples than John. So his own thing was expanding more than John. So his kingdom is now expanding. Watch me. He said, although Jesus was not himself doing it, basically Jesus was not the one doing the immersing. Watch me. He said he left Judah and set out again for the Galilee. Now, that's where we come in here when he says, around that time he went to the hill country. So, as that expansion, so he heard that. Then, on that expansion, he's coming toward the hill country to pray. He said, and Jesus left Judah and set out again for the Galilee. This meant that he had to pass through Samaria. Now, so we see him taking steps at various points in time with foresight, but he then comes here, and what we do see him do is he prays all night about that expansion, because remember also here, we're told again in the Luke 6 that when they had planned, discussing with each other what they could do to Jesus, so now they're planning evil. So it's not that Jesus actually goes to the evil they're planning, it's just that he goes and talks to God about those issues. He's not moving because of the Pharisees. He's not doing it because he's afraid of the Pharisees. No, he recognizes expansion is going to take place. Now, Jesus is very conscious, which we see him do when, particularly even when he gives instructions to Paul. He said, I'm going to send you far away from these people. You don't need to be near them because they're evil. They will they will come out against your expansion, which of course we see happen a lot with Paul. Let me tell you something. Those Jews didn't want the kingdom of God to expand with Paul. So when they got jealous, they went and poisoned those who he got, and he's driven out. So we do see that when it comes to the expansion of the kingdom, Satan will send his people. So that's why you don't need to be around his people when that is happening. Because let me tell you something, listen, every time that's what they did to Paul. So whenever Paul went to the Gentiles, they came in and poisoned those people that next thing they're out. In other words, when that expansion should happen. So, but if you notice here with Jesus, once that expansion is about to happen, he goes into prayer. He doesn't just fall in with them. Or put it more like this, he doesn't, sometimes which is what happens a lot with us, with the expansion, we get so excited. This level of people will be willing to hear. That's not so. You better know that God told you they'll be the ones that want to be hearing, because it's in that expansion that things filter in through that you're not looking for. You need to be awake and alert to make sure that the expansion is God's, not an infiltration. You know what I just said? Because if the infiltration comes in, the purpose of that infiltration is to stop the expansion. But if you notice in Jesus' case, the expansion was not stopped. So even when, if you think of it this way, even when Jesus, and you can look at that in John 11, when Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, when that kingdom, when it expanded out there, he said, look, many of those, in John's Gospel chapter 12, many of those of the Judeans who hadn't believed, after they saw the miracle of that guy being raised from the dead, listen to me, they left church. So we don't know what we're going to do, but we're leaving church. We're not doing no synagogue and no rabbi anymore. We're following Jesus. and that expansion went on. So what I'm saying is, yes, they criticized, they came against it, but they didn't stop the expansion. What I mentioned with Paul was that they did stop his expansion and expel Paul out. Well, if Paul is expelled out, how does he expand when he's not there? He's been driven out. Are you with me? So we'll notice that Jesus never lost his momentum. But obviously we're understanding now what he did. And that's what we want to learn from, so that we have that same foresight. So I said to you, when you look at this prayer, it's phenomenal, the foresight, the way in which Jesus managed every situation, but he managed it with prayer. So he knew exactly when to pray, how to pray, to deal with all of these issues. So you never found him entering that bottleneck and that thing working against him. Never. Or it coming and biting him and hurting because some surprise attack. Or somebody said, but wasn't Judas a surprise attack? No. When Jesus chose him, he knew what he was there for. He knew I chose him to betray me, so he's part of the plan. And Jesus was not surprised. You see how Daniel is not surprised? Because he said, let us get up from here. When he was praying, he said, let us get up from here and go in. My betrayer is at hand. Well, if it was a surprise to Jesus, he would have said, my goodness, I didn't know Judas was a betrayer. He said, no, he's telling them when he's finished praying, he's there. My betrayer is at hand. And if you notice, he didn't run from the betrayer. He walked right into it because he knew that was the reason that guy was there. And he himself mentioned that. He said, he mentioned it about it, but when he mentioned Judas, he said about the betrayal, he said it would have been better if that man were not born. It would have been better for him had he not been born than to betray the Son. So Jesus always mentioned about it. He always talked about it, so it wasn't a surprise. But when you're taken out by surprise, or something like that comes up against you with a surprise attack, and it works, let me tell you something, Satan got you there. And it stopped the expansion of the kingdom, because what we see here is it didn't affect his expansion at all. In fact, it was going to help the whole thing really begin to grow and come into what it needed to be. So that's important for us to see here. So when Jesus came into that region, so Jesus is what we're observing incidents, because, and if you notice something here which is very key, he always kept his eye on those Pharisees or those Jewish leaders. Now you see why, and now I can understand why he was warning Paul, I'm saying you far from them. Because they don't like you expanding, particularly with any God thing. They'll come against it. If you notice, it's not that they listen to me. They didn't want what Paul had to say. Fine, just don't receive Paul. No, that's not enough for them. We don't want this thing to expand, so we'll go and poison those people. So that's the way they work. And if you notice, that even when Jesus is dealing with them, you notice he makes all of his steps and all of his moves talking to God about that situation and making the necessary steps in it, not trying to persuade them. And that was one of the first Paul is trying to persuade. They're not going to hear it. I'm saying far from them. They're not going to hear your message, brother. And Paul is deeply explaining to him, and they know who I was. Say, get going quickly, because he knew them. So basically, that's what we see with the difference between Jesus. So we see him here, as I said, but then he's in this time of prayer, ministering. So he's ministering to God, but in that, as I said, in that all-night prayer, he said he continued in prayer to God. So he's talking to God about various situations, which is what we see happening. We see him first of all come up and then choose the team. He chooses his team that are going to carry out this expansion. And if you notice, he sets it up in such a way that it's going to be easy for them, because you notice that even though we're told that the team of these apostles didn't go out, say they stayed in Jerusalem, even though they didn't go out, as soon as that persecution arose, people started going towards Judah, the Galilee, and all those other areas, Samaria, and then the uttermost parts of the earth. So, and we began to see the brethren in those areas begin to have peace, walk in the Spirit, be edified, and the expansion multiplied. So he said, they remained in the Spirit and expanded out. So Jesus was not just praying what he was doing at that point in time, he was praying, positioning even the apostles for what they were going to carry on through. Now, somebody asked the question, well, is that really so? Yes, it is so, because Jesus even mentions it to them when they're in that region of Samaria. And in fact, he mentions it and says that actually that's the only place, so this should really help you too, that's the only place where it says someone sows and another reaps. He said, you're going to reap what you didn't sow for. So others have labored for that, but you're going to enter into the rest. He said, in fact, that's the only place where that applies. And in other words, he wasn't telling them that seed time and harvest has changed. He's not telling them that you can sow rubbish and reap, and you can sow rubbish and reap good. No, he's saying it only applies in this case because people have put a whole lot of labor into this. You're going to enter into the rest. So you're going to actually benefit from what has been done for you, which of course we see them go ahead, right ahead and do. Because of course Jesus has set the ground for them. It's already said. Jesus had already said that, and that's why I told them go there. And let me tell you something on the other hand. When it came to the uttermost part, that's another matter to get to that. And if you notice, the person who carried that one through was Paul. So it's important for us to say, so when Jesus is praying here, he's not just dealing with the immediate situations, but at the same time, while he's there, he's still praying for power to come into him that can come out of him to heal people. Although he's taking care of the expansion, although he's taking care of all of the forms of infiltration and all of those things that can come in, he still is praying to be filled with enough power that when he comes down that mountain and hits level ground, people can touch him and power comes from him. So you know he's not in fear. So you know he's not praying in trepidation. You know he's not praying in fear. You know he's not praying in worry. He's praying in confidence and assurance. You know what I said? He's praying with confidence and assurance in the God. That's why I said he continued all night in prayer to God, talking to God, communing with his Father, bringing all of these various things together, which will do us very good. To do that, as I said, not get so excited at the expansion that we don't watch for, okay, well, when this expansion happens, what will happen? What will really happen when we expand? Or God does more miracles. What will be the results? What will this evoke? Because it will evoke a whole lot of stuff in the demonic kingdom and among Satan's people, and they will respond. But if you notice something, Jesus already prepared for their responses. So if you notice, as soon as he heard, they expanded more. So think of it this way. Those Pharisees are actually spending time. Think of it this way. Surveillancing Jesus to find out if he has more disciples now than John. So that's how detailed they were. in checking. Remember, these are enemies, but they're checking. Does he have more disciples now than John? We know John had a whole load, but hold on, I mean, this guy seems to be expanding beyond John, and it's worrying. Very worrying, and we need to do something about it. We see them do the same thing when he raises Lazarus from the graves. That guy turned and said, hold on a minute, we need to put a stop to this. Everybody will go after this man if we leave him. So we need to do something. And that's when the Caiaphas comes up with the word and turns around and says, it's better for the man to die. Oh yes. Then we lose the whole nation. I don't know which nation he thought he was going to lose. It's better for the man to die. So those guys were watching. They were surveillancing Jesus to see if to watch his increase stage by stage. He's got more than John now. This is a problem. He's got bigger than John. So, but what I'm saying is, if you notice something, Jesus actually takes all of those things into prayer and into consideration, which is why I said mentioned here the prayer of foresight. Peter mentioned something of it when he talks to the disciples, when he's writing his letter. He mentioned, don't be short-sighted. So we have to have that foresight. So if you notice, when Jesus prayed, he prayed with foresight. So if you notice, and foresight as the expansion happens. So we do increase, but I have to have foresight into what will happen when this increase happens. Because let me tell you something, when you increase, it's also easier to infiltrate. Because you don't know who's who. If you notice, let me tell you this way, if you notice the way Jude put it, the way Jude put it tells you that that was in a time of expansion. He said, certain people have wormed their way in. When you're small, you know who comes in. When they worm their way in, they've just managed to swingle through you and have just become part of you. You don't know how. So he said they've wormed their way in and we need to get them out. If you notice, he didn't say they've wormed their way in and it's fine for them to be in. We need to contend and get them out. Because if we don't get them out, we'll be out. Basically is what he was in effect saying. But that's the difference between our master and ourselves. He took that time and actually prayed through these things. So it's important for us when we note now all-night prayer. It wasn't that Jesus was praying all night about a little need he had. Jesus didn't spend all night praying about a little need. If you look at the answers he has here, you know these are heavy matters. So the things he was addressing at that time were not a little money here and there. To deal with my fears or worries. No. When you see him taking this all-night prayer, see the issues he's dealing with have longevity. Some of them answered instantly, because the one with the disciples was answered instantly. He was told who to choose. Because immediately he came down from that prayer, he chose. So he knew the expansion and made his choice. Well, somebody would say, somebody trying to say to you, well, think of it. I mean, that guy prayed all night and chose those guys. Who would do that? And somebody turns and said, well, they're a bunch of losers he chose. Let me tell you something, there were no bunch of no losers. If you look at the results in Acts of the Apostle, you realize he was smart in who he chose. Because they got those results. So it's important for us to really see this, understand it, and benefit from it. So I think it looks to me again that the time is running. And I just have a few seconds to conclude. So I'm going to have to conclude this, and I think what we will do is have one more part on it so that we fill in all of the gaps, all of the things, so that we have a full picture. I like you to really have the full picture of this, so that when you go now towards all-night prayer, you go with excitement, because when you see the results, Jesus had in this, those results, he had immediate results, but some that came over periods of time. It's just awesome. And really, you really understand, okay, yes, if this is what I need to spend all night doing, yeah, I'll do that. For that reason, I'll do it. So basically, that's what we'll pick up from here as I conclude this in the next part, in this segment. I conclude this segment. I will look at the part 20 and fill in all those gaps in Jesus' name. Bless you.